The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Windsor Castle as Thomas Mitchell adjusted his ceremonial uniform. He had served as a royal guard for 15 years, but nothing in his training had prepared him for what would unfold on this crisp October morning. Camilla. The Queen Consort moved through the palace corridors with unusual haste. Her personal assistant, Margaret, struggled to keep pace while wheeling 2 large Louis Vuitton suitcases behind her. The normally composed Queen Consort glanced nervously over her shoulder every few steps, her fingers trembling as she clutched a leather handbag close to her chest. Thomas noticed the unusual activity from his post near the east wing. Protocol dictated that any unscheduled movements by senior royals required immediate attention. He radioed his supervisor, Captain Henderson, who responded with equal concern. The palace had been in turmoil for weeks. Whispers echoed through the servants' quarters about heated arguments between the king and queen consort. Staff members spoke in hushed tones about documents that had arrived from government investigators. Sealed envelopes that made even the most senior advisors pale when they read their contents. Margaret struggled with the heavy suitcases as they approached the private entrance, where a black Range Rover waited with its engine running. The driver, someone Thomas didn't recognize from the usual royal protection detail, sat behind tinted windows. This departure from protocol set off every alarm in Thomas's experienced mind. As Camilla quickened her pace toward the vehicle, Thomas made a decision that would change everything. He stepped forward from his position, moving to intercept the Queen Consort's path. His training in close protection and years of reading body language told him something was gravely wrong. The Queen Consort's eyes widened when she saw him approaching. For a moment their gazes met, and Thomas saw something he had never witnessed in all his years of service. Pure, unbridled fear in the eyes of a member of the royal family behind closed doors that morning. The palace had been dealing with an unprecedented crisis. Documents had surfaced linking several offshore accounts to transactions that journalists were beginning to investigate. The Prime Minister himself had called an emergency meeting with the king, and lawyers had been arriving at the palace since dawn. Thomas positioned himself between Camilla and the waiting vehicle. His fellow guards, alerted by the unusual scene, began to converge on the area. The tension in the air was palpable as palace staff peered through windows. Watching the drama unfold, Camilla attempted to maintain her composure, lifting her chin with practiced royal dignity. She spoke in clipped tones, ordering Thomas to step aside, but the guard stood firm, his duty to the crown superseding any direct order that might compromise palace security or protocol. The suitcases Margaret had been wheeling came to an abrupt stop. One of them, overpacked and poorly secured, popped open slightly, revealing stacks of documents, jewelry boxes, and what appeared to be bundles of cash in various currencies. Margaret quickly tried to close it, but several guards had already seen the contents. Captain Henderson arrived on the scene, his face grave as he assessed the situation. He had received word from the Palace Security Center that no official travel had been authorized for the Queen Consort. More troubling still, intelligence had suggested that several irregular financial transfers had been detected in royal accounts over the past 72 hours. The confrontation drew the attention of more palace staff. Footmen, secretaries, and even kitchen staff found reasons to pass through nearby corridors, catching glimpses of the unprecedented scene. Never before had a member of the royal guard directly challenged a senior royal in such a public manner. Camilla's carefully constructed facade began to crack. Her voice rose as she demanded passage, invoking her royal status and threatening consequences for anyone who impeded her. But Thomas and his fellow guards had sworn an oath to protect the crown and the institution of the monarchy, even from those within it. The black Range Rover's driver, perhaps sensing the operation's failure, suddenly threw the vehicle into reverse. Tires squealed against ancient cobblestones as the car sped backward, leaving Camilla and Margaret standing exposed with their hastily packed belongings. More senior palace officials began arriving at the scene. The Lord Chamberlain, accompanied by the master of the household, approached with measured steps. Their faces betrayed no emotion, but their presence signaled that this was no longer a simple security matter. Thomas maintained his position as Camilla's protests grew more desperate. She spoke of urgent personal business, a sick relative abroad, anything that might explain her attempted departure. But the assembled officials remained unmoved, their loyalty to the institution outweighing any personal sympathy. The morning's events had been set in motion by discoveries that reached the highest levels of government. Financial irregularities that had been carefully hidden for years were finally coming to light. Investigators had traced a complex web of transactions that raised serious questions about the use of royal privileges for personal gain, as more guards surrounded the scene, forming a discreet but effective barrier. Camilla realized her escape attempt had failed. The suitcases that had promised freedom now stood as evidence of her desperation. Margaret, loyal to the end, remained by her employer's side. Though her face showed the strain of the moment, the palace machinery, refined over centuries to handle crises with discretion, swung into action. Senior courtiers began making phone calls to government officials and legal advisors. The communications team prepared for the inevitable media storm that would follow when news of the morning's events leaked. As palace gossip invariably did, Thomas felt the weight of history on his shoulders as he stood his ground. He knew that by tomorrow his name would be known throughout the kingdom, perhaps throughout the world. The guard who stopped a queen, but in that moment he was simply a man doing his duty. Upholding the oath he had taken on a proud day 15 years earlier, the Lord Chamberlain stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of centuries of tradition. He formally requested that the Queen Consort return to her apartments while matters were properly investigated. It was not quite an arrest. The meaning was clear. Camilla's movements would be restricted, pending further inquiry as the small group began to move back toward the palace. Thomas caught sight of something that would haunt him for years to come. A single tear rolled down Camilla's cheek, quickly wiped away, but not before several witnesses had seen it. The mask of royal composure had slipped completely, revealing a woman who knew her carefully constructed world was collapsing. The suitcases were taken into custody by palace security, their contents to be catalogued and examined by investigators. Each item would tell a story, painting a picture of desperation and fear that had driven a queen consort to attempt fleeing the country. She had sworn to serve. Inside the palace, the king had been informed of the morning's events. Staff members reported hearing raised voices from the private apartments, followed by an ominous silence. The monarchy, which had weathered centuries of storms, faced perhaps its gravest crisis in modern times. Thomas was relieved from his post and asked to provide a detailed report of everything he had witnessed. As he sat in the security office, carefully documenting each moment, he couldn't help but reflect on how a single decision to step forward had changed the course of history. The news began to spread through the palace like wildfire. Servants whispered in corridors, and messages flew between different royal residences. By noon, every member of the extended royal family had been briefed on the morning's dramatic events. Outside the palace walls, the first journalists were beginning to pick up hints that something significant had occurred. Social media buzzed with rumors and speculation, though no one yet knew the full truth of what Thomas Mitchell had prevented that morning. As the sun reached its zenith over Windsor Castle, Camilla sat in her apartments under discreet guard. The woman who had risen from commoner to queen consort now found herself effectively a prisoner in the palace she had once called home. The suitcases that should have carried her to freedom sat in an evidence room, their contents about to reveal secrets that would shake the monarchy to its core. Thomas returned to his post later that afternoon, his fellow guards greeting him with silent nods of respect. He had done his duty, upheld his oath, and in doing so had written himself into the annals of palace history. But as he stood watch over the ancient stones of Windsor, he knew this was only the beginning of a drama that would captivate the world. The palace investigation room had been transformed into a center of intense activity. Lawyers, accountants, and security officials worked through the night, examining every item from Camilla's confiscated suitcases. Under bright fluorescent lights, they cataloged jewelry pieces worth millions, property deeds to homes in various countries, and most damning of all, bank statements that revealed a complex network of hidden accounts. Detective. Chief Inspector Sarah Blackwood from the Metropolitan Police's Special Inquiry Team had been called in to oversee the investigation. Her reputation for handling sensitive cases involving high-profile individuals made her the natural choice for this unprecedented situation. She moved through the evidence with practiced efficiency. Her trained eye catching details others might miss. The documents told a story that stretched back years. Charitable donations that had been redirected, royal patronages that had been monetized, and gifts from foreign dignitaries that had never been declared. Each piece of paper added another layer to a pattern of financial misconduct that shocked even seasoned investigators. Meanwhile, Thomas Mitchell found himself at the center of a media storm. Despite the palace's attempts to maintain secrecy, news of the dramatic confrontation had leaked. Photographers camped outside the castle gates, and Thomas's name trended worldwide on social media. Former colleagues and childhood friends were bombarded with interview requests, all wanting to know more about the guard who had stood up to royalty. The king, Charles, faced the gravest crisis of his reign. In private meetings with the prime minister and senior advisors, he struggled to balance his personal feelings with his constitutional duties. The woman he had loved for decades, who had stood by his side through scandal and triumph, now threatened to bring down everything he had worked to preserve. Palace staff reported troubling scenes from the royal apartments. Meals went untouched, and the king was seen pacing the corridors late into the night. His private secretary, Sir Jonathan Edwards, worked tirelessly to manage the crisis. Coordinating with government officials and preparing for every possible outcome, Camilla remained confined to her quarters, attended only by a small team of trusted staff. Margaret, her loyal assistant, was interviewed repeatedly by investigators, but maintained her discretion. The Queen Consort's requests to speak with lawyers were granted, but all meetings were monitored and recorded. The investigation revealed that the financial irregularities went deeper than anyone had imagined. Shell companies had been established in offshore havens. Royal connections had been leveraged for personal gain, and charitable funds had been misappropriated. Each discovery added to a picture of systematic abuse of royal privilege that spanned continents. Thomas continued his duties. Life had become surreal. Fellow guards treated him with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. Some praised his courage, while others worried about the precedent of a guard challenging a senior royal. The palace hierarchy, built on centuries of deference and protocol, struggled to process what had occurred. Captain Henderson submitted a formal report commending Thomas's actions. In it, he detailed how the guard's intervention had prevented a potential international incident and preserved crucial evidence. The report was circulated among the highest levels of palace administration and government, cementing Thomas's reputation as a hero to some and a troublemaker to others. The international press seized upon the story with relentless enthusiasm. Palace correspondents who had covered royal events for decades found themselves reporting on a scandal unlike anything in modern memory. Questions arose about oversight, accountability, and the very nature of monarchy in the 21st century. Behind the scenes, diplomatic cables flew between London and capitals around the world. Several foreign governments expressed concern about investments and donations that might be connected to the scandal. Ambassadors sought urgent meetings, and international charity organizations began reviewing their royal patronages. The Archbishop of Canterbury was consulted about the constitutional and moral implications of the crisis. The Church of England, intimately connected to the monarchy, found itself navigating treacherous waters. Private prayers were offered for all involved, while public statements remained carefully neutral. Thomas received an unexpected visitor one evening. Prince William, the heir to the throne, requested a private meeting. In a quiet room, away from prying eyes, the future king thanked Thomas personally for his actions. The conversation, though brief, revealed the deep divisions within the royal family about how to proceed. The investigation team made a breakthrough. When they decoded encrypted files found on a laptop in one of the suitcases, the files contained correspondence that implicated several other individuals in the financial schemes. Names of business people, foreign officials, and even some minor royals appeared in the documents. expanding the scope of the scandal dramatically. Public opinion polls showed a nation divided. Some supported Thomas's actions and called for greater transparency in royal finances. Others felt the guard had overstepped his bounds and damaged the dignity of the monarchy. Protest groups gathered outside Buckingham Palace. While royalist organizations rallied in support of the institution, Camilla's health began to deteriorate under the strain. Palace doctors were called to attend to her, reporting signs of severe stress and anxiety. Despite everything, the king insisted she receive the best medical care. Revealing the complex emotions at play in the crisis, the Prime Minister convened an emergency session of the cabinet to discuss the constitutional implications. Ministers debated late into the night about how to balance the independence of the monarchy with the need for accountability. Legal experts were consulted about precedents and possible outcomes. Thomas found himself under protection due to death threats from extreme royalist groups who saw him as a traitor. His family was moved to a secure location, and his daily routine was completely disrupted. The man who had simply tried to do his duty now lived under the shadow of constant security concerns. More evidence emerged from the investigation, including recordings of phone conversations that revealed attempts to move money just days before the failed escape. The sophistication of the financial schemes impressed even veteran fraud investigators. Showing planning that had been years in the making, the palace announced that an independent inquiry would be established to examine royal finances and governance. This unprecedented step was seen as an attempt to restore public confidence, though critics argued it didn't go far enough. The terms of reference for the inquiry became a subject of intense political negotiation. International banks began freezing accounts linked to the investigation. Millions of pounds were secured pending the outcome of legal proceedings. The financial fallout spread to charitable organizations and businesses that had connections to the royal patronages under scrutiny. Thomas was called to testify before a closed parliamentary committee investigating the matter. His calm, professional demeanor impressed the members as he recounted the events of that October morning. His testimony, though given in private, would later be seen as crucial in understanding how the crisis unfolded. The king made the difficult decision to address the nation. In a televised speech from Windsor Castle, he spoke of his commitment to transparency and accountability. Without directly addressing Camilla's situation, he acknowledged that the monarchy must evolve to maintain public trust. The speech was analyzed word by commentators around the world, as weeks turned into months. The investigation continued to uncover new layers of complexity. International law enforcement agencies became involved as the financial trail crossed multiple jurisdictions. What had begun as one woman's desperate attempt to flee had evolved into one of the most significant royal scandals in history. Thomas Mitchell, the guard who had changed history with a single act of duty, continued to serve at Windsor Castle. Though his life had been transformed, he maintained the same quiet professionalism that had defined his career. His fellow guards now looked to him as an example of integrity in the face of impossible choices. The palace, shaken but not broken, began the slow process of reform. New oversight mechanisms were put in place, and financial transparency measures were implemented. The crisis that had threatened to topple the monarchy became a catalyst for long overdue changes. As autumn turned to winter, Camilla remained in her gilded prison, awaiting the legal proceedings that would determine her fate. The suitcases that had promised escape now stood as symbols of a fall from grace that would be remembered for generations. The monarchy had survived, but at a cost that was still being calculated. The Crown prosecution service building in Westminster had never seen such security. Armed police patrolled the perimeter while helicopters circled overhead. Inside, the most anticipated legal proceeding in British history was about to begin. Camilla Parker Bowles, once Queen Consort, now stood as a defendant in a case that would define the future of the monarchy. Sir Geoffrey Pemberton, the lead prosecutor, had spent months preparing his case. The evidence room contained thousands of documents, each meticulously catalogued and cross-referenced. His team had worked 18-hour days to build an airtight case that would withstand the intense scrutiny of the world's media and legal experts. Thomas Mitchell sat in the witness waiting room, his dress uniform pressed to perfection. He had been called as the prosecution's key witness. The man whose actions had prevented the destruction of crucial evidence. Despite months of preparation, he felt the weight of the moment as he prepared to testify in open court. The defense team, led by the renowned barrister Lady Victoria Ashworth, had mounted an aggressive campaign to discredit the investigation. They argued that Camilla had been preparing for a legitimate private trip, that the financial documents were related to personal investments, and that the entire case was built on misunderstandings and procedural errors. Inside the courthouse, journalists from around the world jostled for position. The public gallery was filled with a carefully selected audience, including representatives from various royal households, government officials, and members of the public chosen by lottery. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation. The king had made the agonizing decision not to attend the proceedings. Instead, he remained at Balmoral, the Scottish estate where the royal family had traditionally sought refuge during times of crisis. Reports suggested he spent long hours walking the moors, accompanied only by his protection officers and his troubled thoughts. As Thomas took the witness stand, the courtroom fell silent. Under oath, he recounted the events of that October morning with the same calm precision he had shown throughout the crisis. The prosecutor walked him through each moment, from his first observation of unusual activity to the moment he stepped forward to block the Queen Consort's path. Lady Ashworth's cross-examination was fierce but respectful. She questioned Thomas's interpretation of events, suggested alternative explanations for what he had seen, and tried to paint him as an overzealous guard who had exceeded his authority. But Thomas remained unshaken, his answers consistent with the written reports and video evidence from Palace. Security cameras the trial revealed details that shocked even those who had followed the scandal closely. Email exchanges showed a network of co-conspirators who had helped facilitate the financial schemes. Some were household names in British society. Others were international figures who had used their connections to the royal family for personal gain. Margaret, Camilla's assistant, provided crucial testimony about the preparations for the escape attempt. Under immunity agreement, she revealed how she had been instructed to book flights under false names, arrange for funds to be available at various international locations, and prepare documents that would allow Camilla to establish a new identity abroad. The financial evidence was presented by forensic accountants who had untangled the complex web of transactions. They showed how charitable donations had been diverted through shell companies, how gifts from foreign dignitaries had been sold without declaration, and how royal influence had been monetized through a sophisticated scheme that had operated for over a decade. Public reaction to the revelations was intense. Protests continued outside the courthouse, with Republicans calling for the abolition of the monarchy while Royalists maintained that one person's actions should not taint the entire institution. The nation found itself engaged in a fundamental debate about privilege, accountability, and the role of hereditary power in modern democracy. The defense presented their case with equal vigor. Character witnesses spoke of Camilla's charitable work and dedication to public service. Financial experts offered alternative interpretations of the transactions, suggesting that what prosecutors called fraud could be seen as legitimate, if complex, investment strategies. Camilla herself took the stand on the trial's 15th day. Dressed in a simple black suit, she appeared to have aged years in the months since her failed escape. Her testimony was a mixture of defiance and desperation, as she attempted to explain actions that seemed inexplicable. To most observers, she spoke of feeling trapped in a role she had never fully wanted, of financial pressures that the public couldn't understand, and of advisors who had led her astray. While some found her testimony sympathetic, prosecutors methodically dismantled her explanations with documentary evidence that contradicted her. Claims the international implications of the trial became clear as foreign officials testified via video link. Several admitted to making payments to charities that they now understood had been diverted for personal use. The diplomatic fallout threatened to damage Britain's relationships with key allies and trading partners. Thomas watched from the public gallery as the trial neared its conclusion. The man who had once been an anonymous palace guard had become a symbol of integrity and public service. Publishers had offered him millions for his story, but he had declined all offers, maintaining that he had simply done his duty. The jury deliberations lasted for 6 days. Outside the courthouse, broadcasters maintained round-the-clock coverage, analyzing every possible outcome and its implications. Constitutional scholars debated what would happen if Camilla were convicted, while royal historians searched for precedents in centuries of monarchy. When the verdict came, the courtroom was packed to capacity. As the jury foreman read guilty to the primary charges of fraud and misuse of public position, Camilla swayed slightly in the dock. The woman who had risen from middle-class origins to the heights of British society now faced the possibility of prison. Sentencing was scheduled for 2 weeks later, allowing time for impact statements and pre-sentencing reports. During this period, the palace announced that divorce proceedings had been initiated. The king, forced to choose between personal loyalty and institutional survival, had made his decision. The Archbishop of Canterbury released a statement calling for compassion and healing. The Prime Minister addressed Parliament, outlining reforms to royal finances and governance that would prevent such scandals in the future. The monarchy would survive, but it would be forever changed. On the day of sentencing, Camilla stood as the judge delivered a 5-year prison term, with the possibility of parole after serving half. The judge spoke of the betrayal of public trust and the damage done to a beloved institution. As she was led away, Camilla glanced once at the public gallery, her eyes briefly meeting those of Thomas Mitchell. The aftermath of the trial saw sweeping changes to the monarchy. New oversight bodies were established, financial transparency became mandatory, and the role of royal guards was expanded to include protecting the institution from threats both external and internal. Thomas was promoted and asked to help develop new protocols based on his experience. 6 months later, Thomas stood guard at an investiture ceremony where the king honored those who had served with distinction during the crisis. As his name was called, Thomas approached the sovereign he had sworn to protect. The king's words were brief but heartfelt, thanking him for his courage in protecting the crown from itself. The palace gradually returned to its normal rhythms, though scars remained. Tours now included discreet references to the importance of accountability and transparency. The room where Camilla had been confined became a museum space, dedicated to the history of royal service and duty. Camilla served 3 years of her sentence before being released on parole. She disappeared from public life, reportedly living under an assumed name somewhere in rural France. Those who claimed to have seen her described a woman who bore little resemblance to the confident queen consort who had once stood beside the king. Thomas Mitchell retired from royal service after 25 years, his career forever defined by one morning's decision. He established a training program for security services, teaching the importance of duty over deference. His memoir, published years later, became a definitive account of the crisis that nearly toppled a 1,000-year-old institution. The monarchy adapted and endured, as it had through centuries of crisis. Public trust, though damaged, was slowly rebuilt through transparency and reform. The lessons learned from Camilla's attempted escape and subsequent trial were incorporated into the very fabric of royal governance, as Thomas walked through Windsor Great Park on a crisp autumn morning. Years after the events that had changed his life, he reflected on the nature of duty and courage. He had not sought fame or recognition, had not intended to change history. He had simply stood in a doorway and said no to power when power was wrong. The guard who stopped a queen had become a footnote in history books, a reminder that even the mightiest institutions depend on individuals willing to do what is right. The monarchy continued, reformed and chastened, while somewhere in the French countryside, a woman lived with the memories of what she had lost when she tried to run. The suitcases that had contained a queen's desperate hopes now sat in a palace museum, silent testimony to a scandal that had shaken the foundations of British society. They reminded all who saw them that privilege without accountability is ultimately unsustainable, and that sometimes the greatest service to an institution is to save it from itself. Thomas Mitchell's legacy lived on in the enhanced protocols and oversight measures that governed royal conduct. Future generations of palace guards would learn about the October morning when one man's courage prevented a catastrophe. They would understand that their duty was not just to protect royalty from external threats, but to protect the crown from those who would abuse its privileges. The story became a cautionary tale told in constitutional law classes and security academies around the world. It demonstrated that no position, no matter how exalted, places someone above the law. It showed that ordinary people, doing their jobs with integrity, can change the course of nations. As the years passed, the drama of that autumn morning faded into history. New scandals arose and were addressed, new challenges faced and overcome, but the precedent had been set. The monarchy had proven it could reform itself, could hold its members accountable, and could emerge stronger from crisis. The guard who stopped a queen had done more than prevent an escape. He had saved an institution by forcing it to confront its flaws. In doing so, Thomas Mitchell had written himself into the long history of those who served the end. Why sometimes standing against those who wore it? His watch had ended, but his legacy endured in every guard who understood that true loyalty sometimes means saying no.